Welcome to the Outthinkers Podcast. Plug into fascinating minds and breakthrough ideas that are transforming industries and the world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of Outthinker Networks, a global think tank comprised of corporate strategists, innovators, and entrepreneurs that are shaping the future of business. If this describes you, join us at outthinker.com. Now, let's dive into this week's episode.
So open talent is really this idea that, we've had this radical shift, right? Like for 100 years, the demand side, the companies determined what work was, when it happened, what a job was. And unfortunately, right now, according to Korn Ferry, there's 85 million tech jobs that will not be filled by 2030, costing companies $8.5 trillion. And that's caused all of a sudden is now the supply has the power, right? So the worker has the power to say, I'm going to work when I want and how I want. And, I might work for 4 companies. I might work for 1, but I have choice.
That was John Winsor, founder and chair of Open Assembly, an organization pioneering the adoption of open talent and freelancing. John is a prominent figure in strategic marketing and product innovation, known for his deep understanding of future work trends and open talent strategies. His expertise in collaboration, co-creation, and open innovation has made him a key influencer in the space of innovation, disruption, and storytelling. At Harvard Business School's Laboratory for Innovation Science, he is an executive in residence. Winsor significantly promotes innovation, and as you heard in the highlighted clip, his work centers around advising companies on how to transition to the era of the micro-entrepreneur, the modern employee replacing traditional 9-to-5 employment as we know it. In this conversation, we dive deep into concepts from his book, Open Talent, Leveraging a Global Workforce to Solve Your Biggest Challenges, which he co-authored, and it is a national best-selling book with Jin Paik. It was published by Harvard Business Press in January 2024. We discussed the intricate layers of the modern workforce, including the rapid shift of the workforce culture with the rise of micro-entrepreneurs and freelancers at the core, transforming many industries, the democratization of talent through digital platforms that provide companies a more varied, diverse workforce while providing individuals more opportunities for work. A growing shift away from traditional job roles and titles towards a focus and re-engineering of the nature of work towards tasks and skills to achieve desired outcomes with an emphasis on speed and momentum given today's fast-paced environment. How to break through the mental and organizational barriers that impede your organization from embracing new workforce paradigms to fully take advantage of the modern workforce reality. Ladies and gentlemen, John Winsor. John, I am thrilled to have you on. Thank you for being here with us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So I'm going to start with the same 2 questions I will start with, which the first one is, if you could complete this sentence for me, if you really know me, you know that.
I have had such a crazy life, that I'd rather be like on some big mountain, doing a first ascent skiing or some big wave somewhere in the world that's really hard to get to, or traveling down the coast of Mexico in my van.
How did you get into that? Because you surf, you ski, you seem like an adventure sports kind of person. Where did you grow up and how did you find that?
Well, I grew up pretty much of a traditional Midwestern guy, and I played football, and I went to Colorado College, which is really renowned for a lot of adventure sport, really iconic people.
That's why people go to Colorado.
Exactly. So I started running, and then had this I started a company called Sports and Fitness Publishing that kind of got me ensconced in that. And then when I did that, Black Diamond, which is a climb equipment company, asked me to be on their board of directors. And so I was kind of squarely in that world as I grew these magazines, and I lived that life here in Boulder.
Fascinating. So next question. What's your definition of strategy?
Wow. So, for me, that's my background as well. I'm really a strategist, and I kind of started in more strategy because I built my own businesses, but then I built a company called Radar Communications. We were trying to figure out how to, one of the things we were really intrigued with was the idea that when I bought a a magazine out of bankruptcy, Women's Sports and Fitness. And one of the things I noticed is that in the pages of Women's Sports and Fitness, that they were spending just, tens of thousands of dollars when they started with millions of dollars, like GM and Nike. And so when I sold the company, I noticed this really interesting thing. And we had all these early adoptive consumers that were our readers of Women's Sports and Fitness. So I thought, well, what about not making them the target, but let's put them at the top of the funnel of the whole, the strategy, and help them design products and services for people that instead of getting, participate up here versus down here. And it worked brilliantly. Like we did all the strategy work for Intel and for HP and for Nike and Levi's, and very much from what we called anthro-journalistic perspective. We kind of voice of the consumer. We kind of invented that category back in the early 2000s. But one of the things that was so insightful that probably was a thing that changed my life from a strategy point of view is I met this guy, Alex Bogusky, and I merged my company Radar with Crispin Porter Bogusky. And he's this really wacky, creative ad guy. And we together came up with this idea. I think that companies look at the future and they look at culture as this Mississippi River, Nile River that cuts through this landscape, right? And so your whole job as a strategist to say, where's culture going? What products do we need to create? Where should we position the company? And run ahead and get, downriver and let kind of culture wash over you. And so that's the prevailing idea that was always around when we were there. And Alex and I came up with this idea from the experience that we had with our clients was that, well, that's not the way the world works, right? The way the world works is if you can be provocative enough and if you can do the right thing, then literally the changing culture is super easy to do and you can change it to your advantage. And so I think that personally, what's driven me is the idea of recognizing that the world and culture is very fickle. It's easily moved. And that strategy is about trying to figure out that insight that allows you to move things in your favor, right? So there's two examples that I like to use the work we did back then. One is that Volkswagen came to us and they were really frustrated that they weren't listed in the top 10 safest cars, right? This is like 2008. And so one of the things that we noticed is that everybody that was in that space pretty much had the same, the safety rules made every car pretty much the safest car. But yet Volvo perennially was just a safe car, was the
Of course, that's their central brand.
Exactly, it's their brand. And so we tried to figure out, well, what's the way that we can change that? And what we figured out was that, nobody had actually had a real wreck in a commercial that proved the fact that the cars were safe. So essentially what we did is we went to LA, we took a car, a Volkswagen, strung it with GoPros, took two actors, put them in driver and passenger seat, had them have like a typical conversation, tell them that you're going to drive down the street and something's going to happen, you're going to have a car wreck. And so we did, I think, only 2 commercials. We launched those commercials and the commercials were super controversial. They got on every late night show saying, is it socially correct? Is it Volkswagen, did they do the right thing? Are they taking advantage of these actors? But lo and behold, 2 months later, Volkswagen went from not on the top 10 to number 2 behind Volvo. And so that's a point, right? It's a point of what's not happening in culture. Instead of us trying to say, oh, we're 10% safer than Volvo, it's more saying let's actually show you, let's do that. The second story that is really important, I think, from a strategy standpoint, is that we won Domino's Pizza, and we were the people behind Domino's resurgence. And so when Patrick, the CMO, came to us, he was really frustrated. The whole C-level team, the stock was way down. They hadn't done well. And so the big cultural shift, there were 2 things that we did, was they came to us and they said, we know our pizza sucks, and customers say our pizza sucks, but we're going to make better pizzas. And so our point of view is 100% transparency. Let's say our pizza sucks, right?
Right. I remember that.
Right. Remember that? We called it the pizza apology. All of a sudden, it got all over CNN. And I think there was this really amazing reporter for CNN that actually threw the pizza in the gutter of its, in New York, and then picked it up and ate it. But the idea was your pizza sucks. And so that got so aligned with our customers. All of a sudden, people are like, yeah, your pizza sucks. Thanks so much for admitting that, right? And then the second thing that was super important strategically is that they were really bummed that the whole 30-minute guarantee, I don't know if you remember back in the day.
Sure, 30-minute or you run it back.
Exactly.
The pizza's free.
Pizza's free, right. So what happened is that they couldn't do that anymore because there was a car wreck by a delivery person. And you could track when that message was out there and then the stock price had gone way down because they lost their way. They were just the same as everybody else. So we decided, well, we can't say 30-minute guaranteed, but we could say you've got 30 minutes. And so what we did is we said, hey, you order online, and we created a POS system, or we connected some technology. We built some technology into a POS system called the Pizza Tracker. So when you ordered Domino's, you saw exactly where your pizza was. Oh, Joe's putting it in the oven. Julie just took it out. It's in the delivery car. And there was actually an alarm that went off 5 minutes before saying, hey, get the family together. Pizza's 5 minutes away. And all of a sudden, that just flipped everything upside down. And, since then, I think there was a 10-year period. I'm not sure if it's still running. But
they outperformed Google.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. And that was it, right? We changed them into a technology company. We said, our job is to deliver pizza, but we need to be a technology company to do the best job. So they're implementing it 10 years later, but we came up with the electric car idea to build specific cars that have pizza ovens in the side, which now they're doing. So it reskinned them, and investors saw, holy shit, they're like the most advanced thing. So that's what I mean when, you can take something that's really seen as like not so good and way behind the time, and the stock's way down. And if you're bold enough to say, well, instead of us trying to just fit culture or be a little bit better than, another pizza chain, we can actually blow up the category and pull our customers to us, pull our vendors to us. We're going to make this movement. And so I think that's something that's really important to think about in strategy.
So I really try not to self-promote on this podcast, but there
do
is
it.
a book that I'm publishing in May, and I talk about the Domino's Pizza case, and I think it links to open talent. So here's the premise. The book's called Proximity, and the idea is that across every sector, what we see is that people always want what they want, when they want, where they want it, and digital technologies allow us to deliver on that. So the way I explain what you did with Domino's is you didn't get the pizza necessarily there faster, but you got the experience of the pizza there immediately. And then people prefer that over Pizza Hut. Now, let's now apply that to talent. The idea that people can do the work they want to do when and where they want to do it is bringing work into proximity for workers.
I love it. You're totally right on. Yeah. And I think.
So can you tell us, because I think when a lot of people read open talent,
right,
what they hear is gig work.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's not what you're talking about. If you could just define open talent for us, sounds different than gig work.
Yeah, that's great. So that's why that's a central theme, right? So open talent is really this idea that, we've had this radical shift, right? Like for 100 years, the demand side, the companies determined what work was, when it happened, what a job was. And unfortunately, right now, according to Korn Ferry, there's 85 million tech jobs that will not be filled by 2030, costing companies $8.5 trillion. And that's caused all of a sudden is now the supply has the power, right? So the worker has the power to say, I'm going to work when I want and how I want. And, I might work for 4 companies. I might work for one, but I have choice. What we see in the open talent market, I'll contrast that to the gig work in a sec, but really what we're seeing is this rise of a micro entrepreneur, right? Back when I was at Crispin and when I was at Victors and Spoils, there were about 600,000 people globally that worked in the global advertising market. And today, 10 years later, there's 600,000 people that work in the advertising market. The difference is that there are 60 million creators that are making content and making money in marketing now. And so it's a totally different thing. And the crazy thing to me is if you look at the numbers, these emergent creators, people are like, oh, that's not a big deal. But, if you look at the ranking of the biggest industries, right between the railroad industry and the furniture industry is a little thing called YouTube creators that produce $37 billion of revenue. And so what you're seeing is this kind of the size of an organization has become so much smaller and people can, earn money. Now, so we're talking about creators and freelancers and, being able to do really great higher end work. Gig workers, has really been commoditized, right? It's the Ubers, it's algorithm driven. You're told where to go and when to go and where to go and where to show up to pick up the person. So it's very much of a low end and it's being commodified. The higher end is really changing work from a place to go and from just to a thing to do that fits into the rest of your life. And so one of the things I've seen, back to Mexico, One of the things that I've seen, which I find super fascinating because of COVID, just imagine you were a mid-level strategy person at a firm, and you made 80 grand. You're kind of 3 years out of school, 80 grand a year. Unfortunately, living in New York, you probably spent 85,000 bucks living, right? You were just like scratching it, barely making it. And a lot of those guys, remote work, a lot of people ended up in Mexico. And in my little village in Mexico, you can live a great life for $1,000 a month. You can like rent an apartment and surf it twice a day. And so people are like, I'm going to go to Mexico and I'm going to put 65K away in my bank account. And I'm going to work same amount of time virtually, but I'm going to surf twice a day too and have a great life. And so it's just, I think what's happened because of COVID is people figured out like, I'm not going back to New York and losing 5 grand. I can take a lot less and do what I want to do on the schedule that I want to be on. And it's what companies don't realize in this whole RTO argument is that there's value arbitration going on the worker side. And they're saying, well, what's value? Like work's a part of my life, but it's not my total life.
3 questions that pop out of there. And I love what you're saying because my mission in life is people loving what they do. Yeah. And so I got 3 questions, but I'll lay out 3 and then you answer any of them. All right. First of all, I love that, you say the war for talent is over and talent won. That, that talent now has the bargaining power. But is that just the pendulum swinging and is it going to swing back? Can we argue that this is a semi-permanent state? That's the first one. The second question is, I love that we can give the salaries of New York to workers in Poland and Thailand, right?
Exactly.
But what does that do to the worker in New York or San Francisco?
Yeah, so the second one first. I think the reality is we've created these digital tools that, before the value of somebody working in New York is they had access to the best thinking, the best people, the best materials. So they earned a higher wage, but now you take a, graphic designer in Kuala Lumpur and a graphic designer in New York, and they, let's call them 27 years old, and they've done the same number of cycles with fast Mac and an InDesign program. And so they're equal in skill and ability. The difference is it costs $100,000 to live in New York and it costs $5,000 to live in Kuala Lumpur. And so for a guy in Kuala Lumpur, he's like, wow, somebody's going to pay me $500. That's like a tenth of my annual need, right? It's like $500 for a project. Whereas, somebody in New York wouldn't even want to start for less than $5,000 or $10,000. And so that's the big shift that's happening, right? It's like, I think what we're seeing is the democratization. I think the other thing that we don't recognize in the talent space is that, one of the stories I've been telling lately, or just we've been talking about lately is, remember the days when we had this big thing called the yellow pages in a phone book in our kitchens. And we'd say, if you asked me, you'd say, hey, John, like, where should we go dry clean, do some dry cleaning? You look through it and you say, oh, here's the biggest ad, right? Like, here's the biggest ad. They must be the most stable. Well, who knows? They could have gone out of business. They could have changed ownership that year. They could have, had new staff, a broken down machine. You contrast that to today with Google and you see what was the experience like yesterday, on Google and Yelp and things like that. And so the friction around finding the things you need to find is so radically changed. And that's coming to talent, right? Just look at us. We're having this great conversation. 15 years ago, we would never have the ability to have this podcast so quickly, just, interstitially between, all the other things we have to do in a day.
Let me just dig a little bit more into that friction because I think I've been thinking about it. I think I understand, but I don't think people really grasp how this is a real historical shift. I moved here to Miami from New York about a year ago. I had one option, which was our moving company organizer. If I had to get something installed, it was just a hassle. I had to call someone who then referred me to Stu, then called someone, and then 2 weeks later. But instead, I used TaskRabbit, and the next day I had someone. So just talk us through why, what has changed in technology or society or industry that now makes this possible when it wasn't possible before?
Yeah. Do you remember back in the day when when Zappos started, right? Like everybody's like, you can never buy a pair of shoes online. There's no way. Like, how the hell would you do that? Like, exactly. And Zappos just came up with a really great innovation, right? They just said, hey, we'll send you as many pairs as you want. Just send them back, right? And if that got over that friction. And so I'm seeing the same things, with the clients we work with. Like, there are clients that, are waiting 2 months, 3 months to find the right talent. They just can't find it in the traditional way. And we're going onto these platforms and, you have to substitute a full-time employee to somebody who's going to work on a project basis. But you can go find somebody more skilled than somebody who would work full-time for less money because they're not, they don't go through all the kind of the points of friction of the intermediaries. And you can do that in 2 or 3 days. So 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 days. Like, what do you want to do to get the work done, right? And I think that's just the reality. The reality in my mind is it's just going along the same lines of any of these other kinds of technology innovations is like, I think what we're seeing is the world of roles and jobs are going to go away, and it's going to be all about tasks and skills in order to get outcomes done. I mean, the thing that we always, talk about is just say, hey, you were just promoted, you got a new job as a Fortune 500 CEO, right? And you know that AI is going to be really important, and you're a CPG company. And so you have 2 ways of solving the problem. Your goal is, I need an AI strategy, right? So the old way of doing it is for you to call your CHRO and say, hey, can you hire me an SVP of AI? But we know these days that's an 8-month hire, right? So you hire her and then she hires her team, and that's another 6 months. And then it takes them 3 months to kind of get together and do the strategy. And in today's world, 18 months, like you're toast in AI. The alternative is for you to say, I need an outcome, right? What tasks, the question is, what tasks need to be done to create that outcome? So you could go to a platform like Business Talent Group or Invisible or Graphite. You could go on and find, let's say, 10 experts in AI with CPG experience. You could invite them to Miami. You could have a 2-day session with the rest of your team. And you could say, here are the 100 tasks that need to get done to create a strategy in 2 days, right? And then you go out and you say, okay, let's assign those to the teams, not randomly, but whoever is the best on those teams. First of all, you're interviewing people, who do you want to work with? Secondly, your internal team's learning. And in a month, you've got a strategy. Now, it might only be 85% as good as the strategy in 18 months, but in today's environment, you can't let great be the enemy of good, right?
Then the value of speed.
The value of speed, exactly, and momentum.
Well, then, so we go from roles to tasks. We go from jobs to gigs or whatever we want to call it. And I can see, so first of all, I just yesterday, I was facilitating a session for a public school system here in Florida, and they're looking at recruiting teachers. And I pointed out that there's this platform called Wyzant for tutors, and my kids use it. And you just put in something. I need a AP Algebra 2 teacher who knows something about blah, blah, blah. And you get 100 people that are actually teachers who are working in their off time, right? So what are some of the, talk to us a little bit more about the mindset shifts that school district or any organization needs to make in order to realize, because they were like, well, that's not relevant to us. We can't hire them. We can't let our teachers do part-time work. We own them.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about those mental barriers that we need to overcome.
Well, I think that's exactly right. That's where the rubber meets the road, right? It's really shifting from a scarcity mindset to an abundant mindset to say, it's not that I can't find anybody. It's like, there's a ton of people out there. I just got to change the way that I engage them, right? I was on a talk last week, or actually earlier this week, with a bunch of HR professionals. And one of the people on there was the CHRO from NYU. And she said, this is exactly what you talked about. She's like, oh my God, like I didn't know about this. I mean, I kind of knew about it, but this addresses my problem. It's like, I know for me and my small leadership team, I need a data scientist, but I only need a data scientist about 1/6 of their time. And I know 5 other places in leadership across the organization that need a data scientist, but all about 1/6 of their time. The way our structure and our bureaucracy works is we have to hire 6 full-time data scientists.
Right.
It's like, why can't we hire
what we need?
Right. Why can't we hire one person that gets shared across that? And that's it's the change management side of organizations. My sense is you have a better idea than I do, but I think that this is the existential question in today's environment, technology environment. I've seen so many times in my careers where there was an established leader and all of a sudden they just go away because they couldn't make the transition to a new platform. The one I'm super intrigued with right now is Sports Illustrated. When I grew up, Sports Illustrated was like the most amazing thing, right? It was the most amazing magazine, the content, the writers, all that stuff was amazing. And now they're just totally irrelevant. They didn't make the leap to the digital world. Whereas, ESPN, because they started in film, they could make that leap much easier, and they kind of own the online environment.
Yeah, I've heard you talk sort of similarly to that. And it was reminding me of, you talk about starting with community
Right.
to printing magazines. So there's kind of like that's another kind of mindset shift, right?
Yeah.
Because I guess Sports Illustrated was probably, do you mind talking to us a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think what's really important is how do you create communities around what you do, right? How do you create passion?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I really, respected, I did so much early work when I was in the magazine business with Nike. And so, do you remember the ACG brand?
No, I don't.
ACG,
Sorry.
ACG was called All Conditions Gear at Nike. And so, one of the things I loved is like all of a sudden I get a call from Tinker Hatfield and his team. I didn't know him at the time. And they're like, hey, we want to come to Boulder and we want to just experience what the community of Boulder's like and what are the activities. And then from there, those 3 or 4 days, we went to Cannon Beach and we started, I helped them kind of design the first line of that whole division. And it was really born out of how do we integrate into the community? How do we become part of the community? And I think, one of the industries that's really a guiding light here that people forget is like, look at what Patagonia's done. Like Patagonia has become so strong. It's not about the clothing. It's about their badge. And it's almost like when you wear Patagonia, you're saying, I give to the environment. This is who I am, right? Like, I don't know who to give to. Like, I don't know how to save the world. But if I give to Patagonia, I know they're like on it every day and they're aligned with me. And that's, to me, is what's building a community. So how do you have this alchemy as an organization that, you're purpose-driven? It's not just one thing, right? It's purpose-driven, create a community, use the principles of co-creation to allow the community to engage in the good work that the company's doing to design products and create marketing, doing those things that really create the momentum.
So I get that this open talent movement is better for employees and workers, more engaged. I get that you have access to a greater variety. I get that you get more flexibility, but you also make an economic argument as well about the value of having variable costs. Having your workforce be a variable cost. Could you just walk us through that for people who are thinking of this and just saying, yeah, but what does it do for my bottom line?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, I would say, right, today, I mean, the question I always ask, right, is like, how many people had a budget for AI November 2022? And nobody did, right? But everybody has a budget now. And my point of view, in the innovation space that I've always been in, like you, the key to companies being great innovators is that they have to have a super strong balance sheet, right? They got to have surplus cash to go burn, right? They got to say, we're going to try this. Oh shit, it didn't work. We're going to try the next one.
To invest in that explore part.
Exactly.
Explore versus exploit.
Exactly. The Mike Tushman. Exactly. And so one of the things, if you take that premise, you say innovative companies have strong balance sheets. Well, how do you get to a strong balance sheet? Well, you move more fixed cost to variable cost. If you had just like in October of 2022, it just, hired 1,000 software engineers to do some kind of project, and you realized in November that you had to let go of all those people and hire 1,000 AI software engineers, it would take months. It would be so expensive to do. But what happens if you had that on variable costs going, thanks guys, really appreciate it, but we're going a different direction, turn that off. And the next month, turn on 1,000 people in AI. The variable cost allows you to have the flexibility to be innovative as a company. And I would suggest that any company that's not an innovative company today is going to be dead. Like they're just not going to survive, right?
Because why?
Just because disruption's happening faster and faster.
Yep.
Right? It's blowing up. I mean, I thought back when I was in the magazine world and the internet was just starting to happen in the 90s, like it was a common assumption that Vogue would own fashion in every distribution channel. They would own it online, right? But the problem is that they weren't really a fashion company or a fashion magazine. They really were good at distributing and manufacturing printed magazines that had fashion as a content. And so they got so stuck in this tactical way of distribution that the people that ran the company is like, no, our job is to create magazines and we print them efficiently and we distribute them efficiently. And they forgot that a lot of people were going online. They didn't notice it because their worldview, their strategy, their mindset wasn't towards that. You still see that today, right? I mean, I don't know if you've been watching this solo race across the globe, sailing race. There's this girl, 29 years old, who's in second place. Cole Brenner, I think her name is. And I read the story this morning in the New York Times. It was so beautiful. She's 5'1", 29 years old, professional sailor, but never really allowed into the old boys club of professional sailing, right? Because it's old school, it's East Coast. And so she somehow cobbled together a sponsorship to do this solo race around the world. But she had her sailboat wired with cameras that were all remotely connected through Starlink to her team back in the States. And they just create tons of content. She went from 5,000 viewers on Instagram to 450,000 viewers. And she's redefined what sailing is to the public. And I think that's what's happening, right? It's like the generational gap between the people that are running the companies and saying, I can't work unless my team's in the office sitting beside me. And millennials that are saying, I can work from a sailboat in the middle of the Southern Ocean and blow up the world, right? Like it's just a whole new world.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. I got so many more questions. I know we were reaching the top of our time with
man.
you. You've got great content.
Thanks, bud.
I found stuff on YouTube, podcasts, your website, your books. How would you suggest listeners who've listened to you here and are impassioned by this, for me, really human-centric view of the future of work and organizations, they want to be part of it? Where should they go?
Just go to my website, johnwinsor.com, and you can find all my stuff, you can find my book, all of that stuff. And then obviously LinkedIn and Instagram and everywhere else. But I love, I love the way you said there, because to me, being a micro entrepreneur and you're an entrepreneur, that's what I love about entrepreneurship. It's not about the bureaucracy or the system or the rules. It's about these human one-on-one connections. And I think that's really what future of work is, giving people choice of how they want to live their lives and who they want to connect with to create great things together.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. I'm practically crying. I love that. I love that. That's awesome. John, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the work that you do, for giving us a little taste of it.
Thanks so much.
And making it so accessible. It's so great having you on the podcast.
I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our executive producer, Karina Reyes, our editor, Zach Ness, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Outthinkers.